Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to some of you. Welcome to this OSUN senior thesis presentation panel on inequality. I will be moderating it together with my Bard College Berlin colleague, Ayssuda Külemen. My name is Agata Lisiak. I'm professor of migration studies at Bard College Berlin. Ayssuda and I thought that we could stick to the program, so we'll go in the order of that is included in the program. So we start with Iman, then Lola, Elisheva, Jude, and Megan. But before we start, since we are about 11 or 12 participants in this call, it would be wonderful if everyone could just briefly introduce themselves and tell us your full name, your major or your discipline, your specialization, the institution you are from, and where you are right now, because I know people have been traveling recently. Thank you. So maybe we could do this in the order, first in the order in the program. So first students introduce themselves, and then we could also look who else is in the room.
Iman.
So I'm Iman Johar. I'm from Al-Quds Bard College, Palestine, and my major is economics.
Hi.
So, hi everyone, my name is Lola. I'm from Kyrgyzstan, from American University of Central Asia, and I'm from Psychology department. Yeah. Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Elisheva Mimi Lustig. I am from Ashesi University, Ghana, and I'm doing mechanical engineering, hopefully graduating soon.
Nice. Jude?
I think I'm next, yeah. Sorry. My name's Jude, and I am from Bard College Berlin, or that is where I recently graduated from. My concentration is ethics and politics within the humanities, arts, and social thought degree track. And I'm currently in Berlin.
My name's Megan Connor. I'm from Bard College Annandale, and I'm an economics major.
Hi. Would the other call participants like to introduce themselves? Just go at any order you'd like.
I'll start actually. Hi, I'm Ayssuda Külemen. I teach at Bard College Berlin. I teach politics, and I'm from Turkey, and I live in Berlin at the moment. Yeah. Hi.
Hi. I'm Andy Cutchins, the president of American University of Central Asia, a political scientist by training, and currently stranded in Moscow.
Ah,
Thanks.
hello. Welcome.
Hi, I'm David Shine. I'm from Bard College in Annandale, where I serve as Dean of Studies and Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs. I'm here in Annandale, and I'm going to be jumping between this and the other panel discussion, so forgive me if I flit in and out. But welcome you all. We're really happy you're here, and thank you for doing this.
Thanks, David. And we have a text from Leah Hackathorn to everyone who says that she, sorry, I have no audio, but my name is Leah. I'm the Associate Director of Bard Abroad at Bard College in Annandale. Hi, Leah.
I'm Michael Lewis, and I'm at Al-Quds Bard in Palestine, and I teach in the core program here.
Hi.
Hi everyone, my name is Jibek. I'm a political science student from UCA, and I joined to listen to my friend Lola and to get prepared for tomorrow's presentation as well.
That's so nice of you. Hi, welcome.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Murray. I'm the Dean of International Studies at Bard College and hosting behind the scenes here. Welcome, everyone. Excited to hear about your projects.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, everyone, and welcome again. And let's start with Eman's presentation. Eman, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Okay. So can you see the screen?
Not
yet. It says you have started screen sharing.
And now?
We only see a black screen.
Now? Okay.
Still a black screen.
And now?
Now we see you.
Okay. So can you see the screen right now?
No, we still only see the black screen. Do you think you could speak about your project?
One second.
Hema, is it possible for you to speak without the presentation, without the slides?
Or perhaps what we could do, Eman, is that you send the presentation to one of us, and we will start with the next presenter. And then once we have received the presentation from you, we will present it for you. Would that be okay?
Eman, if you can hear us, and I'll put it in the chat, I'd be happy for you to send it to me and share my screen. I think maybe we should move to our next. I'll write her an email.
Thank you. So let's move on to Lola. Hi, Lola.
Okay. Slowly.
Yeah.
I don't know what is the problem actually, but okay. Yes.
Should I start screen?
So now you see the screen?
No.
No?
Iman, would you send me your slides on email? This is Jen, and I will
Yes, sure.
And we'll have Lola go in the meantime. Okay?
Your email.
So you can see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So hi everyone, again, my name is Lola. I'm from American University of Central Asia, and I'm from Psychology department. My topic is psychological aspects of sex worker security escapes in Bishkek. So there you can see the legal status of sex work in Kyrgyzstan. So, and considering the fact that sex work in Kyrgyzstan is not prohibited, at the same time is not legalized, it is expected that sex workers perceive security around them differently from the majority people in Kyrgyzstan. So the present study was designed to investigate how sex workers perceive security and insecurity around them, and the strategy that they use to form the safe environment for them. So the main research question is, how do sex workers perceive their security? And it also includes some sub-questions, such as what are strategies that they use, protection tools, customs, habits, and also what their everyday practices when they respond to existential constituencies of their life. So yes, move on. So this is qualitative research with 19 female sex workers participants. There was 5 focus group discussions, and 2 of them become group interviews. And recruiting was made through the NGO Tais Plus that works directly towards sex workers community in Kyrgyzstan through their outreach workers. And so design was dynamic storytelling, and I wanted to share with you the assignments and questions because I will emphasize, I will return to this during my results section. So the first assignment was about personal journey of becoming sex worker. Second was the story that they share in the sex workers community. And the third one was the group section, group discussion and creation of original index of suggested stories. So we suggested 3 stories about law enforcement bodies, about the clients, and about the community with each other, with some potential, some suggested actors in these stories, and they should create the original index during the discussion. And the fourth assignment is future letter to a sex worker. So sex workers, according to the respondents, law enforcement bodies fail to protect sex workers, and they named the main representative of the insecurity for sex worker. From another research, 70% of sex workers, they suffer from at least once from the violence, and it define law enforcement bodies as their main perpetrators. So respondents reported about financial abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse. So financial abuse, extortion and bribery. So police officers always referring to Code of Misconduct article on small hooliganism on Kyrgyzstan that with fine 1,000, and they referring to this article during the arbitrary arrest and saying like, you better to pay me $60 every week than to pay me fine with this article, violation of this article, like small hooliganism. And also there was sexual and emotional abuse. So law enforcement bodies, they bring sex workers to the station and just can mock them, bullying them, and also they can ask to perform oral sex in order to let them go. And also I wanted to share with you one story of one sex worker that described the situation with the State Committee of National Security and their officers, which execute their power and financially and sexually abuse several sex workers. So there's a quote like, we work in saunas, we had a pimp, we got caught by the representative of State Committee of National Security, they charged us for some money, the pimp was with us, the cops were following us, we went to all saunas, we collected the money, we gave it to them, and then they were taken to Subotnik, and they raped them until the morning, and they did even smoke and drink, and the people was sitting with them at the table and drinking the tea. So this sex worker is reported to all 6 representatives of State Committee of National Security, but they wasn't fired, they wasn't punished. And it made her to leave the country for some time. And when she was returned, one of the representatives tried to kill her. And then things turned that way that he became her client and then her intimate partner. Sorry. And so sex workers created the security escapes in order to protect them. So it's avoidance and escape, like leaving the country, agreement and following the rules of law enforcement bodies. So for example, some sex workers from young generation, they are afraid to be revealed to the parents and relatives, as long as they from the villages or the regions of Kyrgyzstan that consider the more conservative part of Kyrgyzstan than the cities. And so they agree, and also law enforcement bodies use it, and they can record sex workers on camera and say that like, we can show it to your parents if you don't give us money right now. So another security escapes is sex workers community support. So they live all together in the apartments, like up to 8 people, and they protect each other. NGO support. So as long as sex workers didn't report about violations to law enforcement bodies, about violation from law enforcement bodies to law enforcement bodies, NGO provides legal support for sex workers as in form of lawyers and etc. And also combating the violence. So some of the sex workers, they say that I have a right. You don't have a right to accuse me. If you want, we will go to your station and we will find out who to what article you want to charge me. So something like that. Cunning and the reversal of the attack. So these two security escapes strategies appear during the discussion of the first suggested stories about the they were suggested stories about state security services or about officer who came to the suggested sex worker and asked for a number. If she didn't give her number to him, he will accuse her and will take some money and will go take her to the station. So sex workers from one focus group discussion suggested a cunning and the reversal attack at their responses. So they stated like I can give him number and then I will buy another number, for example, or I will go with him for a while. And they stated like, oh, my husband waiting me here at home, so I should go. And reversal of the attack. So they reverse the attack, like saying like you raped me, and you can blame me, and you raped me actually. So what should be proven? Like you raped me, or I am a sex worker, something like that. Another the main topic for discussion in the sex workers community is clients, and its stories that they share are included individual and group rapes. It includes killings. It includes recording on camera. It includes robbery. So, and as long as they still need to work with clients, they created a security escapes. So first security escapes, sex workers community support. So respondents stated like, for example, we live all in the apartments together, and the client will be afraid to hurt one of the girls because we are stand up for each other and we can fight back and so forth. NGO support, so they created a software app that detect potential dangerous clients from their phone numbers, and so they help them with that. Opposing the abuser, so if their clients will try to hurt their sex worker, they will push him back. Even some sex workers stated that they will kill him. So another security escape is cunning again. Cunning. It's in this case in the format like they stated like it's female cunning, like men all the same. You should calm them and you should change the perception of the situation, that if he trying to hurt you, you should be cunning and try to change the perception. So so sex workers community support is the main
Hey, Lola, we have been sending you messages that your 7 minutes are up. So I understand this is a very short time to present a project that took months of your life to work on, but please move on to the conclusion as there for other speakers.
Yeah, it's the last slide.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. So sex workers community support is the main security escape, but some of the sex workers, they still have a high level of self stigmatization and during the in the community, like they have a high level of desire to leave their job and to be entrepreneur, and but considering the fact that they don't have, even some of them don't have high school diploma, or capital. So it's stated that they have a high level of self-stigmatization. And also in the young generation, they also stated that we don't have stories about our sex workers community, but actually they did in other. So my conclusion is that it's the main actor and the main security escapes is the sex workers community support, and it's still on the way on establishment. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lola. Now, we normally want to have a few questions before we move on to the next presentation. Everybody has 12 minutes, but the 12 minutes is almost over, so we can get one question at the moment. If there are any questions, we'll discuss this in the very end when we have a general discussion too.
So I should stop sharing?
We have time for one question.
Okay.
Yeah, can you stop sharing? Actually, yes, so that we can see. Yes.
I have a question. Lola, I'm wondering if out of your research there are any plans to continue working to provide additional havens or secure spaces for these women.
Actually, when I was conducted with NGO, the main reason they allowed me to make this research, they stated that I will proceed to and make the kind of not conference, like a session with sex workers and present my topic and just come up with they stated they wanted to publish it somewhere and to help sex workers somehow. So I'm planning to after the coronavirus, contact with the heads of these NGOs and come up with their solutions or strategies that help to, in order to, actually the main strategies was to improve the community support because there's still self-stigmatization among sex workers. Yeah.
Thank you, Lola. This was a very interesting presentation. I'm looking forward to discussing it in the end. I have a few questions for you too, actually. So next is either, Iman, are you ready?
Iman, if you're ready, I have your slides.
Yes, I am.
Okay, I will share my screen.
Okay. Also, Iman, I have trouble hearing you. Does anyone else has?
So can I share my screen? Can I try to share it?
I cannot hear Iman. Can everyone else hear her?
No.
Okay, I'm going to mute my audio. Let's try once. I think her screen is frozen.
I'm prepared to show her slides, but I don't know that we have Iman.
Hello?
Yes, hello?
Oh. Can you hear me right now?
Can you talk a little longer?
Can you hear me right now?
Can you begin speaking on your presentation, Iman, close to your computer?
So, okay. So is this clear?
Yes, this is much better. You can start now.
Okay, so hello everybody. It's my honor to be here with you. Today I'm gonna give you an overview about what I have done so far in my senior project. So my topic is about the low female participation rate of educated female in the Palestinian labor market. In order to give you why I choose this topic or what is the significance of this topic, I'm going to break down the keywords of the title, which is, can you move to the next slide? Okay, which is the labor market. Labor market is the key driver for the national economy. The more people's input, can you move to the next slide? Yeah, the more, click enter please.
Okay.
Yes, okay. The more people's input in the labor market, the more participation in the labor market, the more productivity, and thus the more potential for the economy to grow faster. I choose the Palestinian economy as the economy is of my country, and maybe my project would contribute to achieve economic development or improve the economic situation of my country. So this is the first keyword. The second one, which is female, can you enter? Yeah, yeah. Female, women make women make up half of human societies, and their inclusion in the labor market would contribute to achieve economic development. And here in Palestine, the number of women in terms of population is very close to men. So do women participate in the labor market effectively? So the third keyword is, can you move? Yeah. Is education, educated women. Why I focus in education and educated women? So to the next slide. The economist theory says that there is a positive relationship between education and economy's output. When your educational attainment increase, then you will have skills, knowledge, experience, which so-called human capital. Then you will be a productive person. And once you will be a productive person, then the economy's output will increase. And when the economy's output will increase or increases, the educational attainment, there will be a positive response for education. So it's a positive relationship between education and the economy's output. And for the next slide, you can see that there is a positive relationship between the number of educated women across the years and the GDP, the gross domestic product, the national economy. There is a positive response. So this is the first point. Can you move? Okay, in terms of methodology, I use in my research a mix of quantitative and qualitative analysis. I use the data of Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics, and I analyze it in order to determine the factors that affecting female labor force participation. And then I suggested some recommendations and solutions. For the next slide, okay, throughout my analysis to the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics, I found that there is two major problems that educated women face. The first one, there is more than half of educated women are outside the labor market. And in my analysis to the percentage of women who are inside the labor market, there is also a high number of unemployment, a high number of women, of educated women who are seeking a job but they cannot find. So for the next slide, and throughout my analysis of Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics, I built up my research question, which revolves around how to increase skilled women participation in the West Bank labor market in order to achieve economic development. And in my analysis, can you turn? Yeah. I'm turning to the most important part of my senior project, which is the major reasons that stands against women employment in the West Bank labor force, or the Palestinian labor force, which is first of all the political factor. You can turn. Yeah. The political factor, Palestine is an occupied country. It's under the control of Israel. Yeah, stay. It's under the control of Israel. The Palestinian economy is unstable due to the restrictions that imposed by the occupation, which restricts the movement of people and goods, and thus affecting the development economic process. negatively. It's affected negatively. And even in the absence of the wars or the conflict, if there is no actual wars or conflict between the Palestinian and the Israeli occupation, there is still policies that affect the movements of people and goods, like the closure policy you can turn in, the closure policy, and the checkpoints. Yeah, which have a direct impact on women mobility, their access to job, their access to service, their access to public health, and all of that. And due to these procedures, a lot of families force women to leave their jobs. And that lead me to the second major obstacles that stands against women empowerment, which is the social restriction. Can you move? Yeah, the second thing. Okay, the social restriction. Palestinian society is followed by the patriarchal structure, which is very conservative society. It's holding the idea that women should stay at home, raising their children and doing housework. You can move. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Tamam. It's against the idea that women should be involved in the labor market. And most of women leave their jobs due to the pressure of their families, their husband, and their fathers. And at the same time, it's grant the male authority all over resources, all over aspects of life, as well as all over labor market. So they can control women's behavior. They controls women movement. As a result, we found that most females who are inside the labor market, who are participating in the labor market, they are limited in the few fields, which is in services. You can move on. Yeah, services. They are working only in services and other branches like in teaching and healthcare and in the fields of humanities. This is the only field that would be acceptable for women to work on. Okay, finally, which is most importantly, is the economics factor. This is the final things, yeah. Economics factor, there is a weak demand for women labor, women facing the Palestinian society facing a lack of job opportunities. And if there is a job opportunities, the demand for female is less desired compared to men. Due to traditional stereotype of women that women are weak, unprofessional, irresponsible compared to men. The second thing is gender wage gap. Gender wage gap is not only here in Palestine, but all over the world. There is a wage gap, and there is gender discrimination in terms of wages. Male earn higher than female, even if they have the same educational attainment, or if they have if they are in the same position. And other problem that we face is that most women who are in the labor market earn less than the minimum monthly wages, which is 1,450 shekels here in Palestine, which is roughly around $500. And then public and private sector. Private sector is very weak here in Palestine, and it's prefer male over female in terms of employment and in terms of wages. They tend to fire women when they get engaged or they get married. So, okay, and final thing, which is the informal sector. Most women are working in the informal sector, which is unorganized economy. Not registered in the national economy. The employers in this sector are not paying taxes, but at the same time, there is no labor rights, there is no employment, there is no job security. So most people who are working in this sector is working for unpaid work. And they tend to work in any job despite its nature in order to provide household consumption. And that's it. Then I recommended some solution. They are in the same exchange. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Eman. Yes, that was 10 minutes. So again, we ran out of time. Is there a very short question?
Okay.
2 minutes. We have only 2 minutes.
I would have a question. Thank you so much, Aman, for this presentation. I was wondering whether you could tell us about maybe some of the sectors within the informal sector, because informal sector is a rather broad term. So whether there are particular areas that are where women find informal employment or informal occupation. Thank you.
So thank you for your question. First of all, about the informal sector, here in Palestine, most of women who are living in the village or in the camps or in this area, they are working for their families, and most of them working in the agriculture sector. And because they work for their families, most of their work is unpaid work. They cannot, they do not earn, they do earn nothing. And okay, this is the first point. And the second thing is that most of female who they tend to work in any work despite its nature in order to provide household consumption. So they work in a field like for instance agriculture or I'm trying to give you an example about this, like people who like embody. Oh, 1 second, I forget the word. In a swing, like they work in a swing or something like that, or they joining a private company that are not registered in the GDP. They don't have job security. They don't have, there's no labor rights, so they working for long hours for few or little wages, and that's it.
Thank you. Aysura, you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I was talking. Thank you, Eman. And next comes Elisheva. I hope I'm pronouncing this right.
Okay, hold on. Let me share my screen.
Hi.
Can everyone see?
Yes, I can see that. You will receive a notice at 5 minutes telling you that you have 2 minutes left. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so hi again. My name is Elia Mimi-Lustig. I'm from Shasi University in Ghana. My project is the design and fabrication of a pedal-powered washing machine, and it was supervised by Dr. Kinobi Morris. Okay, so we'll move on to the problem identification. It's estimated that over 14% of the global population live off-grid. A fraction of this number do so by choice, but majority live off-grid because of lack of electricity supply to their communities, the high cost of electricity, and just inconsistent supply. There are many other factors like political and socioeconomic reasons, but due to time, we'll not get into it. Electricity from the onset has improved lives tremendously in terms of production, manufacturing, healthcare, you name it. But so we have to identify that these people are living at a disadvantage and their standards of living are not as par to the majority. And I specified my project around laundry, and I'm going to tell you why. Okay, so why laundry? So I wanted to pick a topic or an activity that I felt that was common to everybody, no matter your race, socioeconomic standing. Everybody has performed laundry and do it all the time. So I thought that was a good point to start the conversation about sustainable living and inequality that is currently in our society. And I'm going to go into more specifics. So in 19th century America, the women that stayed at home back in the day dreaded doing laundry. They detested it. And for good reason, because doing laundry using hand washing creates blisters, is labor intensive, time consuming. So eventually they outsourced it to the slaves at the time. Another reason why laundry is for the concept of environmentally optimized laundry. This concept basically is trying to take laundry and optimize it in the best way so it doesn't affect the environment. So we have climate change and carbon emissions. Likewise, the people who can afford to, connect to the national grid are living below $1 a day. And so they need something that is effective enough for them to use, but also cheap. And they can't afford an electrically powered washing machine if they can't even afford electricity. Okay, so the design requirements. So the first one is to have a pedal washing machine that creates enough turbulence, because the turbulence is what creates a wash. So it creates enough turbulence by rotating the washing drum in one direction. We all know our washing machines rotates in two directions, but I will go into more details on why I picked one direction in the next slide. Again, a low cost effective alternative to electrically powered washing machine, but as well as a better alternative to hand washing, and then a mechanized system that uses less water than hand washing or even an electrically powered washing machine, and less detergents. Okay, so the design I ended up with, I'm gonna go through with you like a breakdown. So I used already existing bicycle in my design because I wanted it to be low cost, and I didn't want the community or the household to go and buy a whole new set. So they just used whatever they have, which I presume they already have a bicycle, and then integrate that with the system. So you pedal like you're riding your bicycle. So that's the rotational input. It's transmitted to the rear wheel. That's how bicycles work. And then the rotation of the rear wheel is cause the rotation in the drum because of an established contact between the two surfaces. It acts like a gear system, and that creates turbulent flow. That creates a wash. So for the drum design, again, the motivation of the project was very, it had to be low cost so people could afford it. So instead of doing it in the workshop that the school provided, I decided to go downtown to the local market to work with people called the tin workers, and they're incredibly skilled people that work with sheet metal, and they do so with little to no tools involved. And I spent maybe a few days there trying to learn how they made different objects. So I ended up making two drums, an external one and an internal one. The external one houses everything, makes it watertight, and then the internal one just aids the turbulent flow to be created. My results and calculations and everything, I wouldn't bore you with that, but the results were basically that a human being could pedal this, could rotate this drum using a bicycle at 60 RPM, and that is not going to be so strenuous and not as labor intensive. Okay, so then I did a stand design to see how safe this could be, if it could carry the weight of the water in the drum and the clothes, and they were positive. Okay, so this is the integration of everything, how everything looks. I used SolidWorks, and due to Corona, I couldn't finish the fabrication. Okay, moving on. So objective assessment. So energy efficiency being one of the reasons why I embarked on this project was washing machines with the use of energy. The cheapest and the most energy efficient one uses about 400 watts of electricity. Generating electricity alone release carbon emissions. And so with this prototype, there's no carbon emissions released, and everything is, energy efficient. If you're getting the same quality of wash, it makes sense to go with this route if you're concerned about your carbon emissions. The quality of wash is measured by the turbulence created. And like I said earlier, the turbulence created was adequate for the size of the drum. And the cost was below $30, which is a fraction of the cost of a washing machine at this point. Okay, so potential impact on off-grid off-grid communities. So I think it's very important to realize the inequality that is established even in a common activity such as laundry. We all enjoy it and don't think about it twice, but there are communities that someone doesn't want to apply for a job someone doesn't want to apply for a job because they feel like they cannot, look the part, because they can't afford to wash their clothes every day and look a certain way. Also, if you're using this machine, for example, you have the additional benefits of exercising. So that's well-being and good health. It's pushing the agenda for affordable and clean energy and climate change. And I feel like it's also going to impact the local sector, as I'm employing local people in the market to manufacture this. It's going to create jobs and hopefully impact the society by reducing the income they make a day. So that's a quick summary. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you for this fascinating presentation. We have time for one quick question again. Is there a question? I have one for you, actually. So you're going to make the designs available to people and they're going to build their own machines. Is that right?
Not necessarily. The drums would be made. They're easily made by these skilled locals. And the stand can also be made by them. They're really talented. So I believe it could be available as a set, like when you go to IKEA and you buy a set and you make it up yourself. So it'll be available as a set, and then you just need to integrate the bicycle with it, like take it in and put it in the right place, and then when they need the bicycle to use for transportation, for example, they can take it out. So that's the idea.
Okay, so you're going to make it available to tin workers. They're going to build them according to demand. Did you search for ways to reach out to tin workers outside your own city area to make this widely available?
So again, tin workers are quite common. They're quite common, but quite local. So yeah, they're quite easily available and easy to find. But there are quite a lot in Accra. I live in Accra, and fascinatingly enough, they are quite connected. So if I talk to one guy, he would know another guy, and I could build a team. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure I'll get more questions later, but thank you for your very interesting innovation, more than your presentation. So next comes Jude. Hello?
Hello, I'm gonna turn my video off for the course of the presentation just because my my internet has been kind of shaky lately. But yeah. And okay, can everyone see? Whoops. Yeah. Okay, so my thesis is titled One's Own Boss, Contested Discourses in Digital Platform Labor. My advisor was Agatha Lishak, who also happens to be one of our moderators today. And there's a lot to get through, so I'll just jump right in. So my senior thesis discusses digital platform labor and the discourses that surround it, both from the perspective or the side of the platform companies themselves and from the sides of platform laborers who have mounted a counter discourse to the discourse of platforms, which my overall kind of both preliminary but also overarching research question was, how do digital platforms discursively justify their labor practices, and to what extent and in what ways do platform workers respond to this discourse? So over the course of my studies, I worked on projects that talked a lot about digital platforms, and one of the sort of overarching discursive elements that surrounds platforms is this notion of being one's own boss. So the idea that on platforms, the workers are their own boss and that the platforms themselves have no employment obligations to their workers. But I also was interested in like how workers respond to this. So what is digital platform labor? Just to give a brief description, it's labor that is carried out via digital platforms. And one scholar I looked at, Nick Sarnicek, outlines 5 primary types of platforms, which I won't go into for the sake of time, but these are advertising, cloud, industrial, product, and finally lean platforms, which include Uber, Deliveroo, and Book a Tiger. Labor on lean platforms is notable primarily because of the lack of standardized contractual relations between employees and employers, and thereby a lack of a protected employee status. So for example, Uber drivers can be terminated at any moment. It's usually done by an algorithm. Also, because employees work via an app that mediates between customers and drivers, it leads to a certain atomization amongst drivers. So they have little contact to their employers, little contact amongst each other, and this is, a crucial part of controlling these laborers. So in addition to focusing on Uber and Lyft in my thesis, I also focused on a protest group called Rideshare Drivers United, hereafter referred to as RDU, which is a California-based drivers organization that has been organizing for years for the betterment of labor under Uber and Lyft and similar platforms. And they also helped to organize the Uber and Lyft strikes of 2019, in which people were encouraged to turn off their Uber apps and Lyft apps for 24 hours. So this lack of standardized protections is why many have deemed work on lean platforms to be precarious. So I was interested in the ways in which precarity and precariousness come into play here and how they're discursively negotiated by both workers and platforms. So I turned to Judith Butler's work on precarity and precariousness. And these two concepts are sort of nebulously distinguished, but they both hinge on her notion of vulnerability, which she theorizes as something bodily, which can always arise in particular moments. It exists by virtue of our physical bodily existence in the world. Precariousness, on the other hand, is the potential for this vulnerability to arise, while precarity is the socially differentiated delegation of this precariousness. So in other words, some people are subjected to more precariousness than others, and hence precarious labor, so to speak, is labor marked by heightened precariousness. So this is why platform labor is considered precarious labor, precisely because of these lack of protections, which leaves workers much more vulnerable, to put it simply. So in my research, I relied also for background knowledge on many labor scholars, many of whom emphasized that digital platforms are not inherently novel, in that they are the product of economic paradigm shifts that began in the 70s and 80s with the Reagan and Thatcher governments in the US and the UK, respectively. And these governments sort of entailed, their labor policies to put it as generally and broadly as possible, entailed the erosion of labor unions and organizing power among labor, and thereby the erosion of benefits traditionally associated with post-war welfare states. So benefits such as pensions, healthcare, paid sick and maternal leave, that sort of thing. And this resulted in these shifts result in what Harvey called neoliberalism, which is a theory of political economic practices that proposes that human well-being can best be advanced by liberating individual entrepreneurial freedoms. Oops, my bad. How do I get rid of that? And then, moreover, it has become hegemonic as a mode of discourse. So again, this led me to my methodology, which was focused on the discourse and semiology, the discourse that platforms and platform workers use and the way these interact with each other. Because neoliberalism encompasses also a concept of discourse, not just economic and material realities. So I relied on Harvey's notion of neoliberalism, and then I turned to Michel Foucault's theorization of discourse as a structured, produced array of statements, images, and texts. And then I turned to semiological analysis through the lens of Julian Rose and Roland Barthes and his notion of myth, which I won't get into for the sake of time. And then I focus on the websites that Uber, Lyft, and RDU use or that they have created, because these websites are addressed to workers. Workers are one of the primary groups interact with them. So I used semiological analysis and discursive analysis to look at some images present on these websites. So here's one from Lyft's website. This is from that page where this image was taken, want to be your own boss. So this, again, is very present. And here we can see that this presumed Lyft worker is contained within the smartphone, which conjures up the app as like a central focus of platform labor. And she's also, embedded in an urban environment. So she's at the same time individualized and atomized, but also, mystified into being a part of an urban atmosphere. This is, again, we see an individualized figures in the image from Uber. And then in Rideshare Drivers United, we see what I argue is a collective response, and this can be also visualized in their homepage. Here we see people wearing, uniforms. They're standing in front of a state building in California, indicating, conjuring up a history of state intervention in labor that has been eroded in, the aftermath of the neoliberalization era. So I'm running out of time, so I guess I'll just go quickly to my conclusion. So in my conclusion, I discuss many things, but I also bring up COVID-19, the ongoing pandemic, which has laid bare the inequalities and precarity inherent to platform labor. So in effect, platform laborers find themselves in a double bind. So if you are a Uber or Lyft driver, you have the choice to either continue to drive and face the risk of infection, or stop driving and see your earnings shrivel up basically overnight. Again, because platforms have no legal employment obligations to their drivers. This applies to other types of platforms like Foodora or also Helpling, which is a platform for cleaners in Germany. But ultimately, organizations like RDU are beginning to provide a counterpoint to this individualization through their discursive articulation of collectivity. So that's it. And these are some of my sources.
Thank you. Thank you, Jude.
Okay, there I'm back.
Yeah. And again, we have 3 minutes for the questions. Anyone, please?
Well, if there are no questions, I would have one. I know this thesis quite well because I was Jude's advisor, but I think that some of the terminology that Jude has used in this presentation is also applicable in the other presentations we've heard so far. And I'm thinking here specifically about precariousness and precarity. So I was wondering, Jude, if you could tell us a bit more about these two terms in relation to like how Butler theorizes them.
Yeah, so the text that I drew on for that Butler wrote, that the way I teased out what these terms mean to her is notes towards a performative theory of assembly. And in that context, she was discussing assembly in the sense of like protest movements, so like Occupy Wall Street or like the Arab Spring, like these sorts of, she was discussing these terms in relations to like uprisings basically, or like spontaneous protests. But basically the way I understood is that vulnerability is, as I said in the presentation, a bodily experience, something that can be experienced by virtue of inhabiting like physical space in the world. And then precariousness is the constant potential for this vulnerability to arise. So so in this sense, like a precarious labor, there's a constant potential, for example, for an Uber driver's account to be deleted because they violate some sort of rule or stipulation that Uber has. So for example, Uber drivers have to accept 90% or more of rides, lest they face account deletion. But then precarity refers more to like a social or hierarchical dynamic. In other words, the precarity refers to the ways in which different people or different groups based on various, statuses in society, socioeconomic, and also, identity-based, experience precariousness differently. So like, again, so I guess this factors into platform labor because in relation to other kinds of laborers, so laborers with standardized contracts, for instance, platform laborers do not enjoy the same sort of protection from, for example, being fired spontaneously, or if they get sick, or, if they, for whatever reason, have to stop driving, like they do not have like the benefit of protection from sort of this vulnerability that is also encompassed in the term precariousness. So it's, the way Butler describes it is somewhat nebulous, and I'm sure that there are other interpretations of it as well, but that's sort of how I interpreted it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jude. And next is Megan Connor. Hi, Megan.
Hello. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see it?
Yes,
Everyone
we can see it.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Yes, thank you. And Megan, I'll send you a note at around 5 minutes that you have 2 minutes left, okay?
Okay, perfect. So I wrote about women in the U.S. workforce, and the title of my sproj was "The Price Women Pay: Women's Attachment to Work." So essentially, I looked into what impacts women's ability to equitably participate in the labor force, and this came down to a number of factors, but primarily childcare and access to childcare for women in the United States. So the conversation about the formal versus at-home idealize of women in the labor force kind of started from the beginning of society and the creation of the institution of gender, but it had been amplified with the onset of capitalism and the separation of labor from the home to something done in a formal market sphere. And women were historically left out of that, and they were delegated to at home, and the productivity they provided to the market or the economy was their reproductive labor and productivity. So women in the workforce in the United States take the outsized burden of childcare costs. On average, childcare in the United States costs $11,420 a year, which is roughly 35% of the average woman's income in the United States. So 38% of people in the United States believe that not working outside of the home is best for women when they have young children. That statistic was taken in the early 2000s, but 5 years later, that number went up to 60%, where people believe that children are better off when women stay home with them instead of participating in the labor force. So when taking stock of women who participate in the labor force, regardless of their income or socioeconomic status, women cite childcare as the greatest barrier to work. 24% of women cite childcare as the first thing they need, and the second thing is flexible work hours, which are not provided by the private sector. So this burden of childcare harms all families, in particular mothers, but this harm is exponentially greater for poor families who have lower incomes and who cannot afford to not have both parents, both household earners in the workforce. So they have to have dual breadwinners. But this becomes even more protracted for single mothers. A single mother is the second most common family structure within the United States. 30% of all women with children under the age of 18 are single mothers. And among all racial lines, single mothers have higher poverty rates than the US average. On average, 26.8% of single mothers live in poverty. And this kind of impacts with, they also have food insecurity and are unable to have stable housing. Single mothers also have some of the highest unemployment in the US, and this high employment rate they cite is due to childcare and the instability of childcare and the high cost. Many of them unable to find work that benefits them and gives them an income while also being able to provide for their children. And their high employment is about 10.5% for children under the age of 3 at a time when they most need an income to provide for the health and welfare of their children. Many of them are unemployed, and that is not even concerning or counting those who are outside of the labor force and that our system doesn't take into account. So this is just a timeline of US policy, which I focused on a lot in my work, and kind of offered a policy recommendation that would alleviate these harms of childcare and the high burden that women face because of it, and what has made women kind of leave the labor force. So in 1935, when the New Deal was passed in the US, under FDR, the Social Security Act included something called Aid to Families with Dependent Children, and this provided aid to families who had children who lived in low or no income families. By the 1980s, poverty rates had soared, and that became an unsustainable program in the eyes of a lot of people because the government was spending far too much to alleviate the poverty of these children and families. And in 1996, Clinton passed the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, which is a very long word. And in that, there was the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. This welfare structure ended a 61-year social program, and it decreased the bill of welfare. So the everything that was paid out of welfare, they had an objective to reduce that amount of money. And that is what Temporary Assistance to Needy Families did. It implemented work requirements and transitioned aid to temporary assistance instead of something that was more long-term. These work requirements gave mandated that women had to participate in the labor force. Many times when these women did participate, it was for low-income jobs that were largely unstable, and the average income of women in the United States is roughly $31,000. These low incomes were not enough to sustain their livelihoods, and on top of that, once they met or exceeded the requirement for work, they did not qualify anymore for the welfare that they would need. And on top of that, included a high childcare burden. So this low income still requires you to pay for childcare while you work, so you have the luxury to work. And most of the income of these women would go to paying for childcare for their children. This subsidy has an hour, like this hour requirement. During this time and the implementation of this, real income in the United States fell from what it was in 1980, and the wealth and income inequality became more protracted. And so you saw a lot of people suffering from a lack of ability to pay for childcare, and on top of that, quality childcare. And I concluded by recommending a policy that implemented free childcare for all people within the United States to hopefully alleviate a lot of the harms that women face in terms of entering and staying within the labor force after they have children, and providing for their children high quality education in the most formative ages of their lives. And that, just any questions?
Thank you, Megan. Great, and that was actually 6 minutes, so congratulations on that too. So now we have 6 more minutes to ask questions to Megan. Any questions? This is actually my area, so I'll ask a question to you. There is talk of a more universal, not as universal as you recommended, but universal healthcare nonetheless. Sorry, not healthcare, childcare. What do you think are the prospects? I know this is not something that you research, but is there any chance of some sort of universalization of childcare in the United States? And if not, what do you think is the biggest impediment to that?
I think, so for a universalized childcare, I was really going off of the programs that are already in place in most states of pre-kindergarten, but they operate on a lottery system and they're underfunded and not everyone has access to them. So I don't particularly think there's a lot of political will to implement these things. Very much childcare is what we term a pink collar, very feminine job, so we undervalue them in the formal marketplace. But I do think there's a lot of legislation that can be passed that implements and expands things such as pre-kindergarten in our society. So I think there's a lot of room for making small gains, maybe not the massive, like the bigger policy changes that I recommended in my paper. So, yeah.
And the second part of my question was, what do you think stands in the way of this kind of, like, it's so beneficial to so many families. Why is it so unpopular?
I think because I think something that was shocking in my research was how prevalent it is that US society believes women should stay home. I think there's a lot of social pressures, and I talk about in my paper a little bit how difficult it is to pass family law within the United States, and how most people within Congress don't touch the idea of ruining what we idealize as the family structure or that nuclear family. So to really legislate what should be the makeup of your family and the choices you make within the home to care for your children is very difficult, and we still believe that that should be the responsibility and job of the mother. And interestingly enough, a lot of mothers believe that as well in women. So I think that exists a large barrier for being able to change how we have institutionalized that idea of motherhood within our society. And so I think it's, implement kind of small changes to be able to break down those very like sexist ideas that women have towards themselves sometimes, or that we have really formalized within our economy. So I think that's a particular barrier, is viewing that as something that's so the responsibility of a gender and of women, and not something that should be the responsibility of the government, which Jude even talked about, like the breakdown during Reagan and Thatcher eras of those social welfare programs, and really a change in ideology between the government should protect you and should provide those social benefits for a society. In the US, that's really not something that is believed by the general public, unlike some other countries where welfare is provided.
I just noticed that we have one more question in the chat box from Fernando. I'll just read it out. What about, so it's a question, for Megan still. What about the role of social networks, such as family help for children? Also, what do you think about more flexible parental leave for both parents? Finally, what about the cost of free childcare? How expensive would that be for the public sector? That's a lot of questions, but take your pick or try to address them all, Megan. Thank you.
So I talk a lot about the paid leave. So the United States doesn't offer paid leave to anyone. It's not federally mandated. Only a few states have it. But we do have a federal leave bill that only provides 12 weeks of unpaid leave. So I do talk about the need to have a paid leave for everyone, a paid leave that is ungendered, like non-gendered. And so that's equitable across for everyone, in particular for same-sex couples, which my research doesn't focus on, but it is obviously incredibly important. And not only does paid leave provide for like the benefit of the children, we see a lot of connection towards women taking time off after they have a kid to the infant health, but also their mental health and postpartum depression. So I do talk about an ungendered paid leave policy that's implemented federally. As to the like cost of free childcare, it's obviously incredibly high, but I think, and Iman's project went over this, there's a correlation between women's female labor force participation and GDP growth. So I think you're going to see a lot of GDP growth that also that impacts and benefits the United States, that may help with that outsized bill for paying for childcare. But I don't think it is a problem. The federal government has the ability with our fiat currency to pay for the childcare that is necessary for women to participate. And I'm sorry, I forgot the last question. The first one that Fernando asked.
The role of social networks. I think what is meant here is the role of family in childcare.
Yeah, so that is a big factor. A lot of people do have their families care for their children, and there is a subsidy within the United States to alleviate that, and people of low income who have family members caring for children can get a subsidy. It's not something that, in the US, we don't really have generational living, and so it's far less for most people to be able to have that network to lean on. And in particular, the elderly, so the older people who would care for those children are typically women, and it's also an area where you want to see participation rates for these women so that they have higher levels of Social Security when they're older and are able to provide for themselves as well. So there is that difficulty of really making sure those people still participate, because even when it comes to caring for family, that mostly in the older ages and falls on the burden of women as well. So it's talked about very briefly in my paper.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Megan. So we have, I mean, it was fascinating. I love this topic, but it's something we need to talk about very, very much everywhere, not just in the United States. So I would like to open the floor to everyone. Questions for any of the presenters are welcome. We have 13 minutes to go, so we need to be quick. But just a reminder, we had presentations on gender and employment, participation in the labor market in Palestine. We talked about, one presenter talked about the design of washing machine that's run by a bicycle. One presenter talked about precarity in the digital sector. One presenter talked about sex workers in Kazakhstan and how their vulnerability and insecurity. So generally, most of the topics revolve around gender here, not surprising given that the panel is about inequality. Even when they are not specifically about gender, they touch on gender issues. So given that framework, just generally as a reminder of all the presentations, do you have any questions for any of the presenters? I want to invite especially students to ask questions to other students. Don't be shy about it.
Well, I was curious, Iman, what you were particularly focusing on and how you thought there would be an alleviation of the low participation rate for educated women in the West Bank. So I think it's fascinating that it's particularly educated women who are low participation. So I'm wondering what you think is going to be the greatest propeller for these women to actually be able to participate in the workforce.
Can you repeat your final question?
Just what will propel these women to work in the to like participate in the labor market? What did you focus on that at all, or find anything that you think will really be the change?
Okay, you mean the obstacles against educated women in the labor market?
Yeah, like what barriers need to be removed for women to participate?
Okay, yeah. What's the recommendation or the solution? That maybe, yeah. I recommended some solution, like more. I recommended for educated women to be more demand in the labor market. In the labor, Okay, yeah, for expanding the demand for women, for educated women in the labor market, and give not only in the services sector but also in the productive sectors and in the in the manufacturing sectors, in order to decrease the high unemployment rates of educated women and expand the opportunities for women to participate in other economic sectors, not only in the service sectors. So this is the first point. The second thing that the second recommendation that I suggested that is for the labor law. The Palestinian labor law should be with the labor, or with the women labor who working in unpaid work. So, and also who are working in the private sectors, and there is a lot of discrimination against women in this sector, whereas women cannot take paid leave when they get pregnant, or when they want maternity leave. So I recommend it to be more legislation in this side, as well as for I recommended for like apply the minimum wage level. And most women in the labor market earn less the minimum wage level. So there should be an actual law that that should be applied to make this law be very, very beneficial for women. So women should not, we should stop making women earn the less than the minimum wage level. So this is that's it. And also, I recommended to access women to the credit and the training, in order to give them the ability to establish their or to establish and manage their enterprises, to be a manager, and not only being focuses on the professional and technical position, but women also can be in higher position as well as men, like a manager and so on and so forth. And that's it.
Thank you, Iman. Any other questions?
I'll ask a question unless someone else has one. I'm just curious, I know Jude touched upon COVID's impact on the platform workers. I wonder if other panelists have thoughts on how the economic effects of the pandemic will impact the populations that they've looked at, or their subject of their projects, such as the juggling that women do now working from home and share of childcare in a very unusual time, and what return to the workforce might look like, if your research has led you to develop some of your own conclusions given what's happening in the world.
In terms of right now in the US, what's, COVID and everything that's happening, I briefly touch upon it in my paper, but I looked to 2008 and the Great Financial Crisis to really kind of understand what happened to women during that time. So a lot of women lost their jobs, like a lot of people lost their jobs. But what happened when the economy started to move again and people started to re-enter the workforce is that number for women went down. And during that time, a lot of women decided to stay home and care for their children instead of going back into the labor force and finding a job, because it became incredibly difficult. So I worry that, and the conclusion would be, I think this is going to be a very difficult job market to get back into for anybody in particular. I mean, all of us are graduating from college. It's going to be really hard for educated people, young people, and everyone who's lost their job. And women who are in particular in had been in a dual breadwinning household, married women, of higher socioeconomic statuses will could potentially make the choice to stay home and care for their children instead of entering the workforce, which leads to a lot of compacted harms about women who choose to stay at home and what a loss of income does and for their freedom. So yeah, that's what I think COVID will probably do to not just women, but everybody.
I was wondering if I may ask a follow-up question to this for Lola, because you frame your research questions within the notion of security-scapes, and I wonder how the current pandemic fits into this. So sort of like following up on Jen's question, whether this is something you had a chance to think about at all, what the situation in Kyrgyzstan is right now. I know that in Germany, for instance, sex workers have been experiencing a lot of difficulties right now during the pandemic.
I guess, yeah, it's the same. It already was before the pandemic, like underground. So, and now it's, I guess it's harder for them to work. Like we care of curfew before, like week ago, and they couldn't work on, as I remember, they mostly work on nights, as they stated. So, and as long as we have curfew, so there was like officers who's working around, and they couldn't actually work outside, and so I guess it's really hard for them. And so also we had a news like months ago, like some like bus driver or something like that, like he was he carried sex workers from one part or to another part of the city, because we have a blocks, like we can to go from one part of the city to another part of the city, so it's hard for the sex workers. So there was also some news that some bus driver tried to relocate the sex worker from one part of the city to another. So yeah, I guess it's hard for them for work now. Yeah, it's the same, maybe more harder than in Germany, probably.
Anyone else wants to talk about the effects of COVID? Jude already did, I believe, and but if there are no other questions, I have a question for Jude. I would like to ask you, what's the potential of, I mean, because digital workers are not in the same space, we thought they couldn't organize. That it was difficult to organize, but it looks like they used the digital space to organize, to get together physically, right? Like, do you see a future for worker organizations through digital organizing?
Yeah, so I talked about it very briefly in my thesis, just as like a side sort of, but I do see that as a potential, largely because it to some extent is already happening. Like, so for example, like the past year, until very recently, I worked on a project called Platform Labor in Urban Spaces, which is part of the Horizon 2020 program. And basically, this project was about, my original intention with my thesis was to use the interviews that conducted in this project, but unfortunately they came about too late for me to use. But this project has basically been interviewing platform workers in Berlin and in other European cities. And what has been found is that there are actually many like WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, where just workers interact with each other and give each other tips or advice or whatnot. And these don't necessarily amount to organizing or necessarily like labor associations or labor organizations, but I do think that they could provide like a bedrock or a foundation for some kind of future movement. And, you know, already around the world, like more and more, we're seeing like, so for example, in Canada recently, Foodora bikers tried to unionize effectively, and Foodora's response was to just stop all operations in Canada, so it didn't work. But so clearly the platforms always have the upper hand because by virtue of the app and like the way in which labor is, you know, conducted via these platforms, it's very they're basically always like one step ahead because they can, you know, change their workforce very fluidly and very easily. And there are technological and also legal reasons for this. Basically, I'm straying a little bit, but basically, I think, yes, there is a potential for organizing via digital means, but I think also like there is very much a geographic element to this that cannot be really denied, and that yes, there are organizations like Rideshare Drivers United, but which intends to become its own union, but it's difficult to see right now. It differs across space, I would say. That would be my answer. I think right now in California, it's very strong. That's where Rideshare Drivers United is based. And they recently passed a law that essentially requires Uber and Lyft to classify their drivers as employees and not as like freelancers or independent contractors. Of course, Uber's refusing to comply with this law, but it's, you know, some concessions have been made. So.
Thank you for your answer, and thank you for all these wonderful presentations. I'm very impressed by your interest in the first place in groups of people that are not in your socioeconomic group, in your age group, maybe not even in your geography. I hope you maintain that interest, that universal interest in other people in other groups. And that's the only way we can get out of this mess. But yeah, I enjoyed your presentations a lot, and I'm sure everyone else did too. Thank you. And have a great day, and I do hope you all find jobs and the jobs you want. Yeah. Have a great.
Thank you also from me to everyone, and many thanks to Jennifer Murray for organizing this, and thank you all for tuning in from across the world. Really, it's a beauty of OSUN, really, that we are experiencing right now. And now you know each other's names, so you can reach out to each other too if you have follow-up questions that you were maybe too shy to ask during this call. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you, Jennifer. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.